Viewed from space, our Earth looks both exquisite and vulnerable. From this perspective, we can't help but wonder how God interacts with this beautiful blue planet and the rest of nature.
If there is a creator God, what kind of relationship does he have with his creation?
The beautiful design evident in nature logically suggests a cause embodying artistic and engineering wisdom that transcends anything encountered in our day-to-day experience.
If we attribute design in nature to God, who is he and how does he relate to his creation?
The Bible depicts God as the creator and sustainer of nature, but still separate and outside of it.
Other ideas about God, or gods abound. Pantheists believe God and nature are the same thing, not separate from each other at all. Deists believe God set everything in motion at the beginning, but no longer interacts with nature. And atheists assert that there is no creator God, or any other kind of God. So, a non-existent God cannot have any relationship with nature. Nature is the cause of itself.
The French biologist Jacques Monod put the atheistic materialist view this way.
The ancient covenant is in pieces. Man knows at last that he is alone in the universe's unfeeling immensity, out of which he emerged only by chance. His destiny is nowhere spelled out, nor is his duty. The kingdom above or the darkness below, it is for him to choose.
The atheist view may liberate humans from accountability to God, but it presumes the existence of nature without explanation. It further presumes that once you have it, nature alone is capable of creating the universe and life. Deism has the advantage of a god to create nature, but then makes the same assumption as atheism, that without God's further intervention, nature has the capacity to create life.
Deism and pantheism put a kind of magic into nature, gifting it with the capacity to create life. Atheism is more clear-cut, as it forbids any supernatural magic at all. Invoking magic may be scientifically unsatisfying, but the atheistic view faces an even more challenging set of empirical and philosophical challenges.
Imagine trying to infer the origin of living things if intelligent causes like God are forbidden. Defining living things as natural and nature as originating in natural causes sounds like circular reasoning.
It also begs the question if we want to use science to verify whether nature or an intelligent creator actually created our universe and us. Constraining science to natural explanations for natural phenomena only gives one possible answer.
Dry stone walls, which are found all over the world, illustrate the problem. These walls are built out of uncemented stones, held together by gravity and other natural laws. The walls operate by natural laws, but the activity of intelligent stonemasons explains their origin.
If dry stone walls were defined as natural, and only natural explanations are allowed, there would be no way of ever concluding that dry stone walls were the product of intelligently directed efforts of human beings. In the same way, restricting science to naturalistic explanations, as materialistic atheism does, creates a reasonable expectation that it will attribute properties to nature that nature in reality lacks.
The only way science can determine whether or not dry stone walls are the product of natural forces or an intelligent agent is by first abandoning naturalistic preconceptions about what may have caused the walls, and allowing the possibility that intelligent beings played a role in their production.
Without considering the possibility of intelligence, the science of studying walls becomes biased and dogmatic. The same is true when studying life or other phenomena in nature.
However, the humans who build dry stone walls are part of nature. We don't have to go outside of nature to a supernatural force to find the intelligence behind objects created by humans.
But if an intelligence is behind nature, it must transcend nature in some way. What could it be? Where did it come from? How did or does it exist outside of nature?
The belief that God transcends nature is incompatible with pantheism, and atheists are uncomfortable with supernatural things that open a plethora of metaphysical questions.
Who designed the designer is one of the most common objections to the inference that nature looks designed because it actually is intelligently designed. Where does the design end? It's a very short trip from science to metaphysics when looking at questions of origins.
Metaphysics is the esoteric philosophy that goes beyond the physical world and seeks to understand first causes. Can metaphysical objections outweigh empirical observation of design in nature?
That seems to put the theory before the data. And yet, some people believe metaphysical objections really do outweigh empirical observations.
Others believe that it is reasonable to address metaphysical questions with both empirical observations and metaphysical answers.
That is why the Christian eternal creator God who transcends nature makes so much sense. Within nature, everything has a beginning and thus requires a cause. An eternal God outside of nature is not subject to the same requirement. The Christian God is a metaphysical answer that accounts for the observation of design in nature.
Design in nature is not explained without some eternal cause that involves intelligence. An eternal universe or energy or quantum fluctuation or any other eternal principle lacking intelligence does not explain nature.
And explaining nature by invoking things that are actually part of it to account for its creation makes no sense. But saying that God acted with a purpose to create nature still fails to address just how God acts and the features of his relationship with nature.
A deist would say that God acted in the distant past, but is now remote and no longer active. A theistic evolutionist may allow for God to be active, but only in ways that are not empirically detectable.
Bible believers see the biblical record as an account of God's interaction with nature, both at the time of its creation and throughout subsequent history.
In addition to the evidence of design, which occurred at the beginning, is there specific evidence of God's action in nature? What about miracles? Are miracles direct evidence of God's action?
Arguably, the most dramatic and profound record of God's interaction with nature occurred when Jesus was born and lived as a human. God actually became part of the nature that he created in the first place.
Beyond all question, the mystery of godliness is great. He appeared in a body, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, was taken up in glory.
That sounds like a relationship as intimate as the pantheistic God, but different because God still transcends nature, and while he became part of it, he is not the same thing as nature.
Here is a conceptual framework that may be helpful when thinking about God and nature. It appears that God interacts with nature in 4 distinct ways. First, like a mason laying stones in a dry stone wall, he acts directly as a primary cause in nature. Second, he acts indirectly as a secondary cause using other aspects of nature like a hammer and chisel to achieve his purposes. Third, he acts continuously, holding nature together with unchanging laws. And fourth, he acts intermittently. These 4 types of interactions also act together with each other.
So God acts with continuous primary activity, intermittent primary activity, continuous secondary activity, and intermittent secondary activity. Let's explore what all this actually means.
The difference between God acting directly as primary cause in nature and God acting indirectly as a secondary cause can be illustrated by comparing 2 different actions that result in bowling pins being knocked down.
If I knock the bowling pins down with my foot, that would be a direct or primary action.
If I knocked them down with a bowling ball, the pins would still be knocked down, but it would be the ball that knocked them down, not my foot directly. Although the end result would be the same, and I would still be the agent behind the pins falling, it would be a secondary, not a primary action.
We've also said that God acts continuously or intermittently. God acts continuously to sustain the existence of the universe.
The sun is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word. After He had provided purification for sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven.
God continuously sustains the existence of the universe. His continuous primary actions are so consistent and reliable that we recognize the patterns of His action as laws.
Does that mean then that God is responsible for everything that happens?
No, God sustains the atoms from which we are made, but He gives us the ability to make choices. For example, God's continuous activity sustains the atoms that make up our shoes, but He does not decide for us which shoe we should put on first.
Natural laws are observed regularities in effect throughout the universe. They include fundamental forces like gravity, nuclear forces, and the electromagnetic force.
These laws also include the values of the physical constants, such as the masses of the elementary particles, the speed of light, Planck's constant, and others.
The number of known general laws of nature on which the entire universe operates is surprisingly small.
Scientists study natural laws to predict what will happen in a given set of circumstances. In this way, the practice of science is actually based on the consistency of God's continuous primary action. If God were to stop acting in this consistent manner, the universe would become chaotic or even cease to exist.
In addition to acting continuously, God also acts intermittently. Human beings act as voluntary agents to do something special from time to time, a gift or a special act of kindness. God also acts as a voluntary agent in special ways.
God's intermittent primary action may cause events that are perceived as supernatural miracles.
Miracles are events that could not have been predicted from the preceding state of matter, and which could not have occurred except for the action of an intelligent agent.
Supernatural events are normally consistent with the general laws of nature, although in theory exceptions could occur. For example, if God created through a process like the Big Bang, we don't know of any laws that would apply to the process. On the other hand, there is no reason to suppose that God had to break physical laws to create wine from water, raise the dead, or calm the stormy sea.
Science may have a difficult time analyzing supernatural events, since one cannot observe how God does miracles, only that He does them.
A third classification of how God acts in nature is God's continuous secondary activity.
Weather systems, for example, follow the general laws of nature.
However, the specific state of weather itself may not be directly manipulated by God. He ordinarily causes the weather through secondary or indirect rather than primary or direct means.
Weather systems can be compared to machines that operate on consistent principles, without continuous external guidance. They reveal the localized effects of general laws.
God may also act intermittently through secondary causation. He often answers prayer this way. For example, a needy family who prays for help may find a package on their doorstep. The package could have been put there by an individual who was impressed to do so. If this was the case, God acted directly on someone, using that person as a secondary cause in answering another person's prayer. Certain biblical miracles also seem to have involved God's intermittent secondary actions.
Examples might include using wind to deliver quails to the Hebrews in the wilderness, using hornets to drive away Israel's enemies, and the payment of temple tax for Peter and Jesus by a coin in the mouth of a fish.
However, in each case, the secondary process was probably initiated by primary divine activity. God caused wind to blow, hornets to swarm, and a coin to be in the mouth of the fish. When God set the sequence of events in motion may be a mystery, but some kind of primary action seems reasonable. Because of this, a miracle may involve both secondary and primary activity.
Science can't predict miracles, but after they occur, it may have some success in analyzing events involving intermittent secondary causation. However, dogmatic denial of the possibility of divine activity may blind scientists to even the possibility of miracles.
As already discussed, for metaphysical reasons, some deny the possibility of divine activity in the creation. Some support this position by claiming that the universe is not perfectly designed, so it can't have been created by a divine miracle. Lucretius, back before the time of Christ, argued,
"The nature of the universe confirms it cannot have been created for us by divine power. It has so many faults."
In more contemporary times, Stephen Jay Gould picks up the same argument.
Imperfection carries the day for evolution.
What kind of imperfections prompted these arguments?
Gould believed the thumb of giant pandas to be an example of imperfection. While it works perfectly well for pandas as they manipulate the bamboo they eat, it is made from different wrist bones than human thumbs. Gould argued that the panda's thumb is jury-rigged, thus not designed for the job it does, and God would not have done it that way.
But deciding whether something is badly designed or just cobbled together seems to require an understanding of what the designer had in mind. What if God just wanted a little variety in the way thumbs are made? How do we know the panda's thumb does not work better for its purposes than the kind of thumb we have?
Logically, an imperfect design does not mean something was not designed. The real questions are, what were the intentions of the designer, and how well were those intentions realized? Christians observe all the good design in nature, along with the evidence of God's goodness and love exemplified in the life of Jesus Christ. From this they infer that God must be good, and that the rebellion of sin really does have horrifying consequences for the whole of creation.
What about people's aching backs, or the fact that lots of us have to have our wisdom teeth removed? Those look like designs that could be improved upon.
If you're expecting perfection in something with an apparent purpose and it fails in some way, that does look like a problem. For example, when a bridge collapses because it deteriorated, had a design flaw, was overloaded, or for some other reason, the failure was probably not the designer's intention. Christians believe that we live in a world marred by sin, in which even wonderful designs like the human body still ultimately fail. The once perfect world God created is no longer perfect, and all suffer as a consequence. The Apostle Paul put it this way,
"We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies."
Sin appears to be a reasonable explanation of designs that fail in some way under current conditions. But what about things that appear to be very well designed to do things that are really bad?
The fangs in some poisonous vipers exemplify exactly this problem. Each fang acts like a hollow hypodermic needle attached to poison glands that contract to force the poison through the fangs and into their victim.
And the fangs fold inside the upper jaw so that the snake doesn't bite itself or have long fangs hanging out of its mouth where they could be damaged or in the way. It is a stretch to try to explain something like that as anything other than a system engineered to inject poison into other creatures.
The problem with designs like this is not that they don't look designed, but that they raise a lot of questions about the character of the designer. They show why it's so important to take the Bible as a whole, not just a bit here or there that might suit our fancy.
The Bible clearly states that God is the designer of all things. The Apostle John says that through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made.
But remember that the Bible also tells us that what we see today is not only broken because of sin, it is also cursed. One explanation for the apparently evil design we see in everything from snakes to parasites to thorny plants is that they are the result of God's cursing the earth after Adam and Eve's decision to sin.
To Adam he said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field."
That makes God seem quite harsh.
The Bible reveals God as loving and kind, but not as a jolly old grandfather who is going to reward both the good and the wicked. He is merciful, but also executes justice.
Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably, with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire.
Many people find the idea of a God who executes judgment disturbing, and some try to ignore God's judgment. But there is another character in Scripture who may also explain at least some evil design.
The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him.
The Bible tells us Satan is active on the earth. Some people believe that he is capable of twisting God's original good creation to create the evil we now see in nature. A lot depends on how much creativity you're willing to attribute to the devil.
Even judging whether something in nature is evil or not is very dependent on one's ideas about God. Without God, good and evil are not objective realities. Things just are the way they are. A good God, like the Christian creator God, does not by himself explain the presence of evil design in nature. Whether one believes evil design is the result of God's curse or the devil's handiwork, the Bible provides a clear framework in which a good God can exist while evil also exists.
Let's move from the devil, curses, and the depressing consequences of sin back to our discussion of God's relationship to nature. There seem to be two different questions about God's interaction with nature. The first has to do with how nature, including life, came to be. The second has to do with the role God currently plays in nature.
While God may interact with nature today via direct, indirect, continuous, and intermittent activity, the creation of nature, and specifically life, was clearly a case of direct, intermittent activity. When studying God's activities in nature, it's important to distinguish between questions of origins and questions of operation.
Origins are one-time events, called singularities, while operations occur continuously. Just because you have a good understanding of operations doesn't necessarily mean you have a good understanding of origins.
Think of a car as an example. A good mechanic understands the principles governing operation of automobiles and is able to maintain the machinery in good order or to make repairs when needed. It might seem that the mechanic knows everything there is to know about cars.
But he probably lacks a detailed knowledge of how the car was made. He may never have been to a car manufacturing factory, and even if he had, he would most likely still be unfamiliar with the financial transactions necessary to underwrite the costs of engineering the car, the management needed to coordinate contracts with parts suppliers, or the engineering principles used when programming robots to weld the car body together.
For these and any number of other reasons, we would be right to be skeptical of any mechanic who claimed that manufacturing a car does not require any processes he has not observed, or use any principles that are unknown to him.
Scientists are a little bit like the mechanic. They can observe many physical processes operating in the universe, but none of them have ever seen the origin of a universe or life.
The consistent day-to-day operation of nature, studied using experimental science, may not explain the origin of life. In fact, there are compelling indications that it does not. That's why it's useful to consider questions about origins as a separate category from questions about the operation of nature.
Origins, like the creation of the universe, are by their nature one-time events. It is hard for science to study one-time events, whether those events are origins or miracles.
Just because something is a one-time event, a miracle, doesn't mean it's a violation of natural laws. Science may not be able to explain miracles, but that does not mean they don't happen and may have more to do with an inability to see what God is doing than an inability to understand the physical mechanism.
Singularities, like the creation of life, are not a threat to the practice of science. They are only a problem if one adopts the philosophical position that God is restricted and cannot act in singularities.
Science centers around making observations, creating theories, and deducing empirically testable hypotheses.
So, as long as information about the origin of life and the universe can be brought to bear via our senses, science can inform the study of supernatural events such as creation.
That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched. This we proclaim concerning the word of life.
Belief in the biblical story of origins does not render science irrelevant. Physical evidence of the singular event we call the creation is available in the natural world and accessible to all.
A creationist will approach the entire realm of experimental science in much the same way as any other scientist, with one major exception. Scientists who believe in the Christian God will not automatically rule out the possibility of supernatural forces at work in the universe.
Because of this greater philosophical openness, Bible-believing scientists are able to celebrate evidence of design that other scientists must struggle to explain.